Welcome to ABC24 This Week on this first Sunday of August. We're always glad you're with us to get the real story behind the big stories. We have a great panel, which I'll introduce in a moment, but first, today's topics. First, it's election season, and not just the Memphis mayor's race, but a DeSoto County Sheriff primary that's raising some eyebrows. We'll also talk about the upcoming special legislative session in Nashville. Pro-gun groups are stepping up their pressure on Governor Lee not to call this special session, saying he's getting too cozy with Democrats. And one state lawmaker says it's time for some change at the Shelby County Crime Commission, including the resignation of the guy at the top, Bill Gibbons. Is he right? Does he have a point? We'll get into all that in a moment, but first, let me introduce my distinguished panel. ABC24 political analyst Otis Sanford is here. We also have Catherine Burgess with the Commercial Appeal, and Tawan Stout-Mitchell, political consultant here, and former Memphis City Councilwoman, by the way. So let's start with the Memphis. Now, we'll talk about the city council races in the weeks ahead, but we have a candidate profile we've been showing every week here as we get closer to the Memphis mayor's contest. And this week, it's candidate Paul Young, who has the most money of any of them, at least right now. Let's watch the piece by Zaria Oates.
Not only is the race crowded this year, but it's also nonpartisan, meaning there won't be a primary to narrow down the candidates. But that isn't stopping Young from showing his true blue.
I'm a Democrat, but I look at all people and all issues and try to make the best decision that's going to be in the best interest of the constituents.
Raising more than $500,000.
We have raised over $750,000. The most important statistic from that is the fact that we have over 2,800 individuals that have donated to our campaign.
With an expectation for more young people to show up in October.
I think the younger voters will vote if they see someone that represents their interests. And I think to date, they haven't seen that.
So here's how he plans to address one of the biggest interests in Memphis.
I think when it comes to our young people, we have to make sure that those that are committing the crimes are held accountable, but we also have to identify who's most likely to be in that pool of people creating crimes in the future and injecting opportunities in their lives. So when we know they've been truant from school, we know they've been getting suspended, let's find programs that are located in their zip codes. Let's work with their churches. Let's work with the community groups to make sure that we are getting those children enrolled in some programs that's going to change their trajectory.
Young also stressed the culture of MPD as a top priority of his.
The culture or subculture that led to the tragic incident of Tyree Nichols, we want to make sure that that's rooted out, but we also want to make sure that there's transparency, that there's a restoration of trust and faith from the public.
Aside from crime and MPD, there's still blight. It's an issue residents voice time and time again with seemingly no end in sight.
Our neighborhoods are not attractive. We need to make sure that they're being cleaned up, that we're addressing blight in a very aggressive way, and that's going to be one of my top priorities as mayor.
All right, that was by Zaria Oates. Paul Young, what do we think of him at this point in the campaign? Otis, you first.
Well, I mean, obviously he's attracting donors because, as you said, he has a lot of money, more money than anybody else in the campaign. I thought that piece was interesting on two respects. He went out of his way to say he was a Democrat, which I think he had to do that because
word on the street is he maybe...
Word on the street, another one of our terms. Word on the street is he's voted Republican a few times. So he had to bring that out because this is a heavily Democratic city. And then the young voters. I do think that he is positioned to get young voters, as is maybe Van Turner. I think they are the two who are best positioned to get young voters, but they've got to mobilize them. I've been around young voters for the last 12 years at the university, and while they want to be politically active, they have to have a reason to be politically active, and Paul has to work a little harder, and so does Van and maybe some others, to get those young voters out to the polls.
Catherine, what stuck out to me was that number, 750,000, which is up almost more than 200,000 from the last report we had, the campaign report. There's a lot of money floating around in this race when you look at all the different campaigns. It's not being spent, at least so far. Why is that at this point, do you think?
I think that candidates are holding off until they think we get a little bit closer to the race, in particular for TV ads. Things are already heating up, but they're heating up very early. We're still months away from October. So people are starting to do text messages and send out mailers, things like that, but the real big spending on television ads, that's going to come a little bit later.
How much later do you think? When school starts, maybe a week or two, or longer than that?
You know, I don't really know.
Okay, you're not hearing any talk about that?
No.
All right. Tawan, what do you make of the, Mr. Young, first of all, we should point out you are a consultant for Sheriff Bonner, but where do you think that he stands in relation to Mr. Young, to the other candidates?
I think Mr. Young is a good candidate. Let's just make that clear. I think he has some challenges. You can't tell me I'm a Democrat when in the decade of saving democracy, you were voting Republican. That's hard to reconcile. If you told me you voted Republican 20 years ago, probably wouldn't think another thing of it. But for a Democrat, Democrats will see elections in 2016 and 2018 when we were trying to vote for senators and governors as an affront to what we believe in. And I am a Democrat, and I know I'm offended by it.
It is public record when somebody votes in a primary.
In a primary, right.
Right, and you know, I know a lot of people who may be Democrat who will vote in a Republican primary because they think their vote's going to make more of a difference because Tennessee has the open primaries, right. And that's sometimes the reason they do that. I don't know how much should we attach to that?
Well, I mean, I do it, but I'm a journalist, and I don't want people to typecast me as a Republican or a Democrat. But I believe in voting in every election. So there are some years when I will vote in the Republican primary just because I want to go back and forth. And that might not be the case with Paul Young. But again, we're talking about primaries, not necessarily the general election when we don't know who he voted for there.
Well, I don't know who he voted for in the general election, but I do know that he voted in some primaries. And they were primaries where we had some choices to make about where we're taking this country. And that is important to me. Okay. And why you would vote in primaries when we are making big decisions about the direction of the country. This is a Democratic city. Yeah. There are Democrats who are going to ask that question, and they have every right to.
And he'll have to explain it.
That's right.
All right, well, let's talk about your guy, Sheriff Bonner. He was making news this week because he picked up an endorsement that the campaign is pretty proud of, on Friday, as a matter of fact. ACRE, which is how would you describe the group?
Well, they're retired public employees from the city of Memphis. And normally, I thought this was unusual because normally they do not endorse.
Yeah. 30 years, I think, is what they said.
But they work in the best interest of the retirees and the city as a whole. And often you don't hear from employees. They are usually the silent bunch unless they are with a union. But to hear their voices, I thought that spoke volume, and most of them are retired, and so I'm assuming that most of them are concerned about crime.
We have a mayoral debate coming up pretty soon. Our friends of the Daily Memphian and WKNO are sponsoring this one. It'll be one of the few televised debates at this point, and it's interesting to me that two of the top men in terms of polling, Willie Harrington and Sheriff Bonner, are not taking part in this televised debate. What do you think about that, Catherine?
I think it's an interesting strategy. Mayor Harrington has been very clear that debates are not his strategy at all. He wants to be very much more on the ground with the people, is how he describes what he's trying to do. As for Sheriff Bonner, I don't really know why. Maybe you can speak to that, why he hasn't participated in very many debates, but I know there are a lot of people who would like to see them participating. But there are also probably some candidates who feel that with 17 people on the ballot, appearing on a panel of 17 people, you're not going to get much opportunity to get your point across and be heard.
Go ahead.
I don't think it's going to be 17 on any of these future debates because there are so many people. I've said before, there's only about 6 candidates that we really need to look at right here. I think it is strategy, but I think it's bad strategy right now. Now, Sheriff Bonner has been on at least one debate that I know of, but I think nobody is an incumbent here. And you can't take the high ground to say that I'm not going to participate because I'm already the mayor and I don't have to do that. We don't have that here. So I think it's incumbent upon all of these candidates, Mayor Harrington included, to address the voters and have the voters size him up against the other candidates, because there are people who were 4 and 5 years old who will be voting this time when Dr. Harrington left office. So I think he needs to show the voters what he's about and what he plans to do in that kind of setting.
You can get your guy to show up at these debates?
Wait. I'm not managing the campaign now. But I do think Mr. Bonner has attended some debates.
He has been.
And a lot of forums. And I do know, y'all have no idea how many requests come in during the day. And I think you will see him on some future debates.
Okay.
But
good.
there are times, I think the last debate, he was accepting an award for Sheriff of the Year for the state of Tennessee. Now, I don't expect him to skip that opportunity to receive that award to go to the debate. But I do expect when there's not a conflict for him to show up.
Okay.
I just think when there's some televised debates, I think it's incumbent upon all major candidates to be there, so people who can't get out to a venue to see these candidates.
And I think you'll see him on some debates.
Okay, good.
I'm not going to say all.
Yeah.